I recently had a colleague reach out to me about an author who submitted a manuscript to a predatory journal that then quickly published it. And now that the predatory journal published the manuscript, reputable journals are flagging the manuscript as already published and rejecting the submission. And the predatory journal is non-responsive to the author. This is a situation that you do not want to find yourself in. And predatory journals are getting better and better at appearing reputable. So in this video, I'm going to share what to look out for so that you don't fall into this same trap. And if we haven't met, hello, my name is Crystal Heron. I'm a trained biomedical scientist turned clinical researcher and now scientific and medical editor. And since 2011, I've been on a mission to empower scientists, clinicians, and professional writers to master the craft of writing so they can write with intention and integrity. Predatory journals have many names. They are called fake, questionable, illegitimate, fraudulent, deceptive, counterfeit, dark, or pseudo-journals. And these journals claim to be legitimate scholarly journals in an effort to make money off of publication fees. And if you figure out that they are predatory after submitting or after publication, they can charge you a withdrawal or retraction fee, or they may be impossible to reach and require you to take legal action, which is not always easy. That is a mess that you want to avoid. Now, predatory journals are getting harder to distinguish from reputable journals, so you need to know what to look out for. I have certainly had to do some very deep digging into a potential predatory journal to figure out if it was legitimate. So I'm going to share what to look out for. And don't worry, you don't need to take notes. I've created a checklist that you can download for free, and you'll find a link in the description box. So when assessing a potential predatory journal, there are several things to consider that we can bucket into categories. Let's get into them. So the first thing to consider is familiarity. Have you or any of your colleagues heard of or published in the journal before? Or have you read any articles in the journal before? If you have not heard of the journal or the publisher, or you haven't read any articles in the journal before, that's a first flag to do some digging. And you can often find clues if you've received a solicitation email to submit a manuscript to the journal. And these emails tend to be the gateway to predatory journals because authors will get excited about getting an invitation, and they might more easily overlook that the email came from a predatory journal. I actually get these types of emails fairly often, so I've learned what to look out for. One thing to look out for is, does the email contain spelling or grammar errors? Because legitimate journals are very unlikely to have spelling or grammar errors. Of course, there are humans writing these emails, so it's possible, but it's highly unlikely. Also, does the email contain any other questionable characteristics, such as inconsistent formatting or generic information about you or your work? I've seen these emails with different font sizes or styles throughout the text, or maybe there's a vague greeting of madam instead of my first name or Dr. Heron, so that can be a flag for an email to watch for. Also, is the journal name unique or does it mimic another journal? This has been a flag for me, like the name of a journal you recognize, but maybe it has international in front of it, or maybe it reverses a couple of words in a journal that's familiar to you. So those are some things to watch out for. Also, is the sender's email address legitimate? For example, is it not a generic Gmail address? Or it's not something like xv794@yahoo.com. That's usually a flag that it's coming from a predatory journal because most journals will have a dedicated domain name for their journal and the email addresses will be associated with that domain. Another thing to look for in the email is the timestamp and whether it's consistent with the working hours of the journal's country of origin. So if the journal claims that it's a US-based journal, but the email is coming at midnight in US time, That's a red flag that it's probably a predatory journal. The other thing to look for in an email are any suspicious links. Now, be careful and don't click on anything. You want to be sure to inspect these links before you click on them. And all you need to do is just right click on the link and select inspect, and then you'll get all kinds of information on the link. Or you can do a separate internet search to look for the journal. And I'll give you some tips on what to look for on the journal's website in a moment. In the email, you also want to look at whether the sender claims to be following up with you or maybe contacting you on behalf of the editor-in-chief. For example, I've gotten emails where there's an RE in the subject line as though they're replying to an email I may have sent or following up on something. And so you're more likely to click on it thinking, oh no, I might have missed an email. So those are ones to watch out for as well. Now, if the email is suspicious, just delete it. Don't reply. Don't click on links. And if you're still a little bit unsure, but it might be okay, you can then do a little bit more digging into the website. So when assessing a potential predatory journal, you also want to explore all the details on the journal's website. So first, does the journal even have a website? Because if it doesn't, it's a red flag. And then if it does have a website, is the publisher's name clearly displayed on the journal's website? For example, a lot of journals will have Sage Publishing on their website or Taylor & Francis Publishing on their website. So you want to look for a publisher's name in addition to the journal's name. You also want to take a look at the website domain to make sure that it's a custom domain that matches the journal name. So a reputable journal will have a custom domain that is the same or very similar to the journal. Sometimes it's an abbreviated form, but if the website is something like xlm542.com, that's a red flag that it's probably a predatory journal. And then when you're looking at the website, you also want to look for any spelling or grammar errors, because that is often a flag that the journal is predatory, because a journal will have an editorial staff that will make sure the text is pristine. Although I do recognize there are humans, we do make mistakes. You might find an occasional typo, but for the most part, they're few and far between. You also want to look for any other questionable characteristics on the website. For example, does it have a sloppy or outdated layout? Does it have blurry images or inconsistent formatting? I have been able to just pull up a homepage and very quickly tell that the website is outdated or sloppy and know that it is not a reputable journal. On the website, you also want to make sure that you can easily contact the journal by email, phone, and postal mail. And if you're a little bit unsure, you can check the country code of the phone number. You can check the zip code of the address. You can even look up the address on Google Maps, for example, to make sure it's not someone's house in a random country somewhere. So that is a really helpful way to be able to see if the journal is reputable. So sometimes just a quick scan of the homepage is enough to indicate that the journal is predatory. And if the higher level details look okay, you can dive even deeper into the transparency of the journal. So when you are on the journal's website, carefully review the journal's information. For example, does the journal have a verifiable editorial board? They might list some names, they might even include some photos, but you can look up the people on the board. You can look at the university they might indicate or look up their LinkedIn profile, and that way you can make sure that they are real people. Also, you want to look at whether the journal has a peer review process and that they describe it on the website. And you want to read it and understand, is it a robust process? Are they over-promising or rapid review? And you want to look for any of those questionable details. You also might notice a website might say that the time to publication is unusually short, like weeks, when peer review usually takes months. And so that's a flag that it is a predatory journal. Another thing to look for is whether the journal describes clear policies on their website. Do they have a copyright policy, a license policy, a conflict of interest policy for authors, editors, and reviewers? You want to make sure all those details are clearly described on the website as well. You also want to make sure that the website clearly states the publication fees. And you also want to review the author instructions on the website to make sure that they are legit as well and comprehensive. Also, you want to look at whether the journal uses a submission portal or if they accept submissions via email. If they don't have a portal, it's a red flag that it's not a reputable journal. And if they only accept submissions via email, that is also a giant red flag. You can also look at whether the journal indexes or archives publications, because a reputable journal will have a process for doing that. Also, does the journal use digital object identifiers? These are more and more common and are a good sign that a journal is reputable. Also, does the journal have an impact factor, or does it share metrics about citations? Those are things to watch for as well. Now, some journals are new or may not be as well known, and they may not have an impact factor. And so another thing you can do is look at the associations with the journal. For example, is the journal listed in the ISSN portal? So ISSN stands for International Standard Serial Number. And this portal allows you to search through the worldwide database of ISSN bibliographic records to see if the journal is listed in those records. And the downloadable checklist that I mentioned includes a link to that database. You can also check if the journal is indexed in other databases associated with your field. I mostly work in the medical field, so I would check the NLM catalog or the National Library of Medicine catalog. And so in that catalog, you can search the subset of journals that are referenced in the National Center for Biotechnology Information, or NCBI. You can look in that database as well. And there's also a link to that in the checklist. Another place that you can check is to see if the journal is a member of the Committee on Publication and Ethics, or COPE. So COPE defines best practices in the ethics of scholarly publishing, and there's a link to that in the checklist as well. And then another place you can check is to see if the journal is a member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, or OASPA. So OASPA has a membership that includes scholar-led and professional publishers of books and journals. And so you can check that out as well. And there is a link in the checklist for that one as well. And then another place you can look is to see if the journal is listed in the Directory of Open Access Journals, or DOAJ. So DOAJ is an extensive index of diverse open access journals from around the world, and you'll find a link to that in the checklist as well. And then if you find that this journal is not listed in one of these databases, you might also check to see if the journal is associated with a professional organization or a healthcare institution. For example, I've worked with a new journal that was spinning out of a medical center that was not yet listed in some of these databases. So that's another way to check to see if there's any kind of association that would indicate that the journal is reputable. So to help you identify whether a journal can be trusted with your work, do some research with all these details in mind. And you can use the checklist that I created to help you. And there's a link in the description box to that checklist. And all of this might seem like a lot of work, but it is well worth it, because the consequences of submitting to a predatory journal can be disastrous. So my mantra is, when in doubt, rule it out and find a different journal. And if you want some guidance on how to choose the best journal for your manuscript, check out the video that I'll link to at the end of this video, and I'll walk you through exactly what factors to consider when choosing the best journal for your manuscript. And if there's something in particular that you'd like to learn more about, let me know in the comments. I created these videos for you, so I want to make sure that I'm creating something that you'll find valuable. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video.